Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution here on IDAGIO. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and this is my weekly series in which I'm chatting with weekly guests who I find really inspiring, people who are pushing boundaries in classical music, and talking to them about what drives them, what kind of fuels that rule breaking or that ability to sort of see between the lines. I'm really thrilled to be joined today by conductor André de Ridder. André holds a unique position as the conductor of today, being stylistically and as versatile at home in Baroque music to contemporary music and pushing boundaries of cross-genre collaboration. He has conducted the Chicago Symphony, the New York Philharmonic, the BBC Symphony Orchestra, the Orchestre de Paris, Ensemble Intercontemporain, the Rotterdam Philharmonic, the Finnish Radio Symphony Orchestra, just to name a few. He is the founder of a super cool experimental collective based in Berlin called Stargaze, as well as the artistic director of the Musica Nova Helsinki. He's also a curator at the South Bank Center. And I really enjoyed today just discovering his discography, which ranges from Deutsche Grammophon recordings of the Max Richter and There Will Be Blood soundtrack, as well to indie labels with his collective Stargaze. And so I really recommend listening to a lot of his recordings here on IDAGIO, as well as his playlist, which he curated for us today. So please welcome André de Ridder. Hi, André.
Hi, Rachel. Hello, everyone.
So nice to have you here on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be talking to you.
Thank you. André, I'd like to just begin by asking what your earliest introductions to music were, and whether there was a particular musical moment that you find stands out that sort of kind of led you on this musical path.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very classical music family. My father was a conductor as well, and opera conductor. And my mom was an opera singer. They met on the opera stage, and so basically we moved around quite a lot in the beginning in Germany, from opera house to opera house. And I almost grew up in the pit, loving to sit in the orchestra and really getting to know the insides of how an orchestra works, and also contributing to the stage. So love of opera was founded then. But I guess then I was an only child, and outside my house, my family, I was out in school with my friends and contemporaries, none of which were listening to classical music. So they were all like into new kinds of pop music and electronic music and even punk music. So I was really exposed by my friends to these other genres and other kinds of music. And I guess, this has both been a very, very strong influence. And then I got to study. I was a junior student in violin, so violin was my first instrument, and I got to study classical music. So concentrated for that on that for a while. But then later on in my life, when I started conducting and working with orchestras, especially in contemporary music to start with, I sort of somehow then got back in touch with my roots, sort of what my friends were listening to and my interest in other kinds of music. And I guess that's where some of my collaboratively minded work across genres has really been influenced by.
And sort of at which point did you start conducting? I mean, how did that come into play for you?
Yeah, I was so as a violinist, obviously I was able to enter youth orchestras, and in these youth orchestras in Berlin, where I grew up, I actually met some interesting conductors who I then helped out a little bit and assisted when they weren't there. One of them was Vladimir Yurovsky, in fact. Well, he was, because he came from Russia to Berlin to study conducting at the Hans Eisler Musikhochschule. And then he took over the so-called Sibelius Orchestra, which was a youth and amateur orchestra I played in. And obviously that was like super interesting. And, I would like take string rehearsals or wind rehearsals, or sometimes even a tutti when he wasn't there. And that sort of was That was the beginning. But then also I was at the other Hochschule, HDK, now UDK, and already had this drive, like founding my own ensemble. And I actually put together a group of strings and winds and did some like early Mozart symphonies, and did that. So this is where it started happening. How I guess from the also perspective of an orchestral player, of a chamber musician, then really became interested in the world of orchestral repertoire and expressing it physically and musically and philosophically in all these different ways that you are required to as a conductor.
Yeah. And interesting that you also kind of formed and founded these ensembles starting really young as well, because now that's something that you do a lot in your
since then that is true. Actually, you are right. There is a red thread in that. So then when I left Berlin to study conducting, first to Vienna. I did a year in Vienna before coming to the Royal Academy of Music in London, where I did my postgraduate studies in conducting. And again, there, like around about my second year, there was a really interesting crowd of young composers around, and also composer professors. I especially would like to mention somebody like Michael Finnissy, who is a real sort of musical hero to me, but maybe a little bit of an unsung hero as a composer. Not enough played in my mind. And he was an interesting tutor who also, when we worked with ensembles in contemporary music, he would have interesting thoughts for both, well, in three ways: for us conductors, for the players who play, and for the composers. Anyway, and out of these groups, again, I started a group at the Royal Academy of Music that was like a chamber group, also size of 12, 13 people. And we debuted at the Spitalfields Festival, funnily enough, when Judith Weir was the artistic director. Now, of course, later I returned to the festival as artistic director. So it started back then, and we played, both contemporary music and then these Mahler arrangements of Mahler, Das Lied von der Erde, these sort of things. And yeah, we toured quite a little bit. So then, of course, when we all graduated, everybody went their different ways. So that ensemble was in the past. But and then when the dust settled, like I started my conducting career and so on, I actually moved back to Berlin. And when the dust had settled with all these things, and I sort of felt like I came out of the tunnel a little bit, I again had this urge of founding a group that was independent of the, let's say, the clockworks of the classical music industry and sort of the matrix, of the weekly concerts with orchestras, or the productions, in opera houses that plan like about 3 or 4 years in advance. Not anymore. Not anymore. And do something that I could be really spontaneous with decisions what we wanted to do musically, but also find like-minded musicians. I mean, the idea of having, it's almost like a band, but classical musicians, but it's between being a chamber music group and having the spirit of, and I really didn't want to conduct, I didn't found them to conduct them. I have to be honest, with the previous group, I was really keen to conduct. I was young and I wanted to do it. So I founded them also because I wanted to conduct them or my own group. And in this case, it was different. I wanted to escape a little bit, to do something different also. And also play violin within the group sometimes, or sometimes just sort of curate the project or help it, initiate it, and then put it together with other artists, other promoters or festivals who would be interested in it, and develop these ideas. So that was the drive behind starting Stargaze.
Amazing. It's such a cool collective. And I loved like reading about it. Of course, as a Berliner, I know about it. I've known about it for a while, but and I've listened to some of your stuff. I love that, like, part of your mission is that you also call yourselves a workshop, and how you have a very experimental attitude.
Yeah, we work. In fact, one of our main working modes is workshopping things.
Yeah.
Amongst ourselves as well as with other musicians. So, we might work with some musicians, like an electronic musician who doesn't notate or write music, but has extremely fantastically good ears, which is also something I sort of relearned about the importance of that, and then would work with us, and develop music that we could then also play by heart or half improvised elements, really, again, using our ears as chamber musicians, but in a different way, not coming away from the text, from the music. But it's not only, nowadays we think of ourselves as a group that can connect these words. We have pieces commissioned by us, by composers, to write for our specific lineup, as well as bringing ideas to other musicians that we then record with. We create music with, we've recently created music for a big dance production with the wonderful Irish dance company Tak Damsa, and Michael Keegan-Dolan, the amazing choreographer, and an Irish traditional musician. And we actually went to New Zealand. This was already started 2 years ago, and then it was a process of over a year developing the music for this dance piece with the dancers in the room, partly, which was such a fantastic experience. So not this experience where you as an orchestra or ensemble, you come to a dance or opera production right at the last minute and just play the music that you're given, but really, do it the other way around. Be in the room from the beginning, meet the dancers and feed off their energy and develop the music like that. I'm actually wondering if that's possible for music theater one day. That would be a dream project, our next dream project. A little bit like devised theater, but do it with opera. Anyway.
Well, it makes future. Exactly. And in a way, music of the past, right? Kind of also perhaps not far off from how Mozart would have written an opera.
Yeah, more on a lot of things on the fly. Yeah, it needed it needs another bit of music, an aria, or
depending on that performer that's. No, I think it's just fantastic, and of course I have so many questions about it because it's so unique and brave, and I wonder, especially that you're also doing so much traditional stuff, like you're conducting the major symphonies. Do you find what are the difference in risk taking? Like, do you find that that you can take more risks, and what kind of risks are those that you can take as a small collective where, you're not perhaps getting the same kind of funding, or where there's different pressures?
Yeah, of course, the overheads that big organizations have, like certain symphony orchestras or opera houses, they with big subscription schemes and groups, they mean that unfortunately, too often it means that you sort of play safe towards, for example, the subscribers, the subscription audience, and the known and tried and tested scheme, and which I also enjoy in a way that the classic concert format, the classic concert hall where acoustic music sounds best, that have been built for orchestras. I love all that. I'm not, for example, not necessarily a friend of taking symphony orchestras to nightclubs where you have to amplify, to a not always satisfying extent. And I love the concert halls, and I love the format of presenting symphonies, classical symphonies in the concert hall. And I believe more people should know about it. That's an entirely different question. And therefore, the reason to start Stagis was to be able to do really risky and experimental things. We started out really small, and we could do things on the fly, and we would play at pop festivals where people didn't even know who Edgar Varese was, but really loved the music. And they didn't necessarily want to know who the composer was. They just enjoyed this moment of us playing with live instruments and the crazy sounds that we would create. And they might ask afterwards, what was that? Was that mostly they think it's our piece.
Right.
We've written the piece, because that's what bands do, when they play it. So it's so interesting to have this clash and conversations that come out of it with the different audiences.
Exactly.
And then when you notice that, of course, you can do anything. So the risk taking actually becomes a little limited, because actually there is no risk there.
There is no risk.
There's no danger. There's no danger that you put a foot wrong, that you you start this Brahms symphony in the wrong way,
That's super interesting.
Or you scare off the audience because it says Bartok on the.
Yeah.
That's something I learned actually was in the, you know, when I started conducting professionally in the UK, I often hear those things. I often from promoters or programmers, I hear the sentence, Bartok is box office death. Even Schumann is box office death. This is really like this kind of speech, and this is a literal quote, is quite, you know, it's sort of, it made me really sad, you know, inside. But, and even though they're within that audience frame they're working, they're right. To the audience they're catering, yeah, they won't come if you say even Schumann. And that's so, it's kind of so disheartening. But I don't think it has to be that way. Yeah,
for sure. There was one other project I wanted to ask about, which is this this not another Beethoven concert. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
That was, yeah. Actually, now we're talking risk taking. Actually, that probably was a risk. Yeah, we called it ABC.
Okay.
And it means in sort of not another Beethoven cycle, and something that nobody would have thought Stargaze would ever do is like play Beethoven symphonies, and we never thought we would do. Like, in fact, before the Beethoven year, like 2 years before, we said, "Oh, spare me another Beethoven cycle," and that's where this title came from. We said, "Oh, actually, no. Let's actually do what nobody expects us to do, which is look at the entire oeuvre of Beethoven symphonies, but let's make versions of it that are kind of analytic and new viewpoints, and each symphony should be a collaboration with a different artist, and not necessarily just composers, like recompose projects, like 1 or 2 are, but others may be like a visual designer or a jazz musician or a lighting designer or a choreographer." And then we started this project. We started with Beethoven 9, like at the top, and it was premiered on 1st of February at the Barbican Centre in London. It was a co-production with Lucerne Festival and Lucerne Theatre, and also Cologne Philharmonie. Of course, then after that date, most of it, because of Corona, fell through. The beautiful thing now is, like, we did symphony number 1, 2, and 8 and 9, and we've enjoyed it so much, and we feel that we've not finished with it at all. So this project is just going to roll on, and never mind the Beethoven year ends. It doesn't matter. I mean, we're just going to continue this project. It's really, really, really interesting, and it's mostly composers or musicians that never before played a Beethoven symphony, sometimes not even have heard a Beethoven symphony in concert before. And this, for me, is when they then look into playing this piece or adapting this piece, is a very, very fresh viewpoint. To them, it's almost like hearing a new record of an artist they didn't know before. It's like a world premiere. And yeah, so this was an interesting process for us. And it's still in progress.
Yeah.
We have Matthew Herbert was the electronic author who did Beethoven 9, but we've commissioned many other composers like Nicole Lisée, Josephine Stevenson, Kate Moore to do sort of recompositions or new compositions based on this, on the material.
Oh, Nicole is a fellow Canadian, and I had her on the show already.
Right, I put her on the playlist. She's got
exactly. With her book
on the playlist, which is fantastic. I think she is, and I wouldn't call her an emerging composer because she's sort of in some circles really, really established, but I think she's starting to also get really well known in Europe, and I recommend to check her out. She's a fantastic composer. She's written also a piece for Stargaze before, and I've premiered some of her music in Toronto, and took her also to Musica Nova Helsinki. She's an incredible talent. Yeah, I'm also a big fan. You played any of her etudes, the Hitchcock etudes, or the Hitchcock etudes? They're on my wish list. But actually, I'm working on. She has a lieder cycle, Malfunction Lieder, and they're kind of loosely based off. You have it with video projections with Maria from The Sound of Music. Oh wow! Torn apart, and it's really, really cool. Yeah, so that's what she does. Yeah, Oh, I don't know that piece. I want to hear that. I want to see that.
I hopefully do it in Berlin, but.
Oh yeah. Okay. Let us know.
Yes, exactly. But I would love, yeah. So in Helsinki, you're the artistic director of Musica Nova, which is Finland's biggest contemporary music festival.
Right. It's a biannual festival. It used to happen every year, I think, in the beginnings, and one of the first editions, I think 40 years ago, Kaija Sarjärvi was the artistic director, and many eminent composers mainly afterwards. And then they changed it to a 2-year scheme, which I really enjoy, because it's not this sort of, again, it's not like a turnaround from year to year, and you know how it's really a amazing and very intense job to put a festival together, especially of this size. And the special thing about this festival is that it's jointly organized by all the main music institutions in Helsinki, especially. So both the big symphony orchestras are so-called main organizers who contribute to the overall budget. Helsinki Philharmonic and the Finnish Radio Symphony Orchestra, the National Opera, the Helsinki Festival, which is the summer festival that's part of the same events foundation that Musica Nova is also, Tapiola Sinfonietta, which is the fantastic chamber orchestra, now the Composers Association, and Yle, which is the radio and television broadcasting organization. Oh my God, I hope I haven't forgotten anyone now. And it's really unique, because all these ensembles or groups, organizations, big ships that usually, work their own corner, and maybe even in competition to some extent, they really come together every month around one table to plan this festival together. And I'm more or less like a moderator and bring ideas, and we discuss them together. And it's a really, and I just realized it this year, in this very difficult time, how important that is, and that this sort of exchange that happens in this festival is just what is needed at this time. And they've always been doing it. Obviously, I came to Finland in awe of an incredible music scene. We all know what great conductors and composers, with the musical education system, what it has produced. And Finnish Radio Symphony Orchestra actually is like Musica Nova all year round. Like, it's an orchestra that has contemporary music and probably a world premiere in every single concert, and the audience is always sold out. And Helsinki Philharmonic the same. And that was, for me. So what can I do? But it was like, I think I was the first non-Finnish artistic director of which was an honor, but also a big ask. But maybe then it was because I did bring a slightly different perspective. It was easy for me again, because it was appreciated to have that.
Yeah. And like reading and kind of about the festival, I see that like a lot of the mandate is building bridges between sort of contemporary music and other genres of art.
Yeah, but maybe if I can claim, that is something I was sort of specifically asked when they approached me to sort of broaden that spectrum a little bit, and maybe I'm known for, but I'm also just incredibly interested in, and especially this time. So the next festival is in February, this coming February 2nd to the 10th. Yes. Incredibly challenging times, and even though Scandinavian countries, they still had concerts going on throughout most of this time, I'd say even in Finland, even in Denmark, where I gave a concert last week, and I was lucky to do so, they've now shut down the concerts for at least 2 or 3 weeks up to Christmas, and see what happens then. So we're a little bit worried. But the idea this time was, there was an early idea to have like a figurehead idea involve the music of Xenakis, or the spirit of Xenakis, as a sort of godfather for this festival. Not necessarily to have a portrait concert of his music. But just think about the spirit of the combination of spaces and architecture and music, but also science and environmental questions, which of course Xenakis touched on. And then when this pandemic happened, we thought we can think much even more radically in that vein. And then I decided quite early on, I wanted to find an interesting young Finnish contemporary architect. And I found somebody really cool called Thomas Toivon, and he's actually quite established figure, really interesting architect who's also an electronic musician. So he also had this sort of both musician and architecture. And then I sort of became the music artistic director, and I wanted a sort of artistic advisor that was an architect, as if Xenakis was split into personalities. And he also runs the new academy where he works with, it's a bit like Olafur Eliasson's academy here in Berlin, where he works with really interesting young designers and architects and develops, their profile. And so, and then with the insecurity of the pandemic, we said, okay, this is actually the moment to ask all these questions through the festival. And the whole festival becomes that question. How do we go forward? Where do we listen to music? How do we listen to music? How can we open up listening to music? And we work with listening rooms for just 1 or 2 people. He built a sauna himself. He runs a sauna, but there's electronic music playing through the walls because there's also a studio, and we're going to have a listening room in there. And but the main project of the festival now is becoming that students of his new academy are collaborating with young composers from the Korvat Auki Association, which is the Young Composers Association, which one day actually Kaja Sarriau, Isa-Pekka Salo, and Magnus Lindberg founded. And we have found sort of pairs of collaborators, architects, designers, and composers to create works in the spirit of Xenakis, but more so in the spirit of Xenakis' polytopes concept. So which was this, he's written a few of those pieces where he went into an architectural crazy space, sometimes historic, and combined it with music and visuals, like mostly light shows. It was like these Robert Henke shows with that you have in the Ewerk here in Berlin. So early precursors of these kind of multimedia shows almost. And this was very much Xenakis' big idea called Polytopes. So our project is called Helsinki Polytopes. And in fact, our whole festival is called Polytopia. So we're saying what we're creating with this festival is a polytopia, which also works for the organization model of Helsinki, because polytopes, many different voices, many different themes, many different organizers who work together, and play in the different concert halls and the opera to create one festival. So everything sort of came together in that sense. And the Helsinki Polytopes are going to happen all over the city. One is going to happen in a forest. One's going to happen in a bicycle, in a racing cyclist practice tunnel. These kind of things. So it's not inventing we didn't really want to go the sort of just sound installation idea, but go a little bit beyond that idea in the sense of Xenakis, but it's developed a little bit further into a 21st century and maybe very 2020 idea.
That's fantastic. I mean, I'm congratulations that this happened.
Thank you.
Really.
And I should also mention, we do have the sort of conventional art composers in focus. Lisa Streich, young composer from Sweden, incredibly exciting. Simon Sten Andersen, very cutting edge Danish composer. He's also joining into this spirit actually, because there's a wonderful new amazing landmark building in the middle of Helsinki, which is the new public library. It's called Oodi Library. And Simon is going to go in there for a week. And he has this series of pieces called Runtime Arrow, where he basically does acoustic and visual geo mapping of buildings, which again is sort of, for me, quite a Xenakis sort of idea. And then he goes to all the weird spaces within the building that nobody sees and records sounds and video at the same time. And then he edits this piece So it's going to be, that library is going to be in the focus of how it sounds, what it looks like. And it's just another Helsinki polytope for me. So we've been able to connect these different strands and ideas in one whole
exactly thing. And it sounds also, it's also connecting your community. So it's like not just connecting the spaces and the music and the dramaturgy side of it, but also the community.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's true. I mean, that's the big question, how to do that, and how famous question, how music and classical music connects to the community we're based in, but don't always get to the people that are there. And for me, it works with this, going to talk to architects about music and how they perceive sound, and bring in their community. We've got another project where we collaborate with a festival that goes on at the same time in Helsinki, which is a brilliant film festival. It's called the Doc Point Festival. It's a pure documentary festival. And we talked to them and said, they don't really have their own music documentary strand, but we suggested, can we collaborate on something? And we're going to have in fact, we're going to announce tomorrow, maybe I'm allowed to go ahead with it, but they suggested, the Doc Point Festival always wanted to show this 1914, 1918 silent film documentary of the South Pole expedition by Sir Ernest Shackleton. It's a brilliant 80-minute documentary film. They said, would you be able to have composers that might score it and do a live scoring of it? And yes, we have. We're going to have a live performance in collaboration with that festival. So again, you bring in the film audience to music, and the other way around, and it just creates another element of the polytopos in the thing. So I think that's a good way of doing it. In a way, it's an easy way of doing it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about it, and wishing you all the best for that in February.
We hope it will. Yeah. It will happen. I mean, because we have the Radio and TV Broadcasting Association with us at the table, we know that we'd be able to digitalize or stream a lot of the concerts and the content. But we also know that when we're if we do a piece in the forest, we'll probably be able to hear it and stage it and go there, to be honest,
Yeah.
But we did have to change a lot of the orchestral repertoire, for example, for the orchestral concerts. That's why we cannot do we had planned 2 big Xenakis orchestral pieces. We cannot do, but we will do other things instead with fewer musicians. That in one case it's not Xenakis, but actually Varese Désert, which had a film done to by Bill Viola. And this idea again of sound and light film, and Varese's idea wasn't a million miles away from Xenakis' own idea of a sort of different art forms coming together, and creating a new space. So we're doing Désert by Varese because I'm not interested to just think it has to be by Xenakis, but it's more the spirit of these people, of these pioneers also.
Yeah.
We can still learn from today.
I heard Espace last year for the first time, and this,
right.
That was at the concert house, I think, and I mean that was just kind of life-changing. These. Yeah,
I know some of these people still have a physical impact on you that you just cannot, that you cannot escape.
Yeah. I kind of speaking now about these limitations that come with this time. We talk a lot about what it means to go back to normal after this crisis. And of course, I mean, we have to kind of reshape what normal is. And I'm curious what does that mean for you as an individual, for example?
Well, I mean, that's the big question. Do we really want to go back to normal? I mean, people say, oh, we're never going to go back to normal. And then it's pretty clear that people are actually trying to get back to normal, and a good normal, of course. That's a good thing. But I've of course had time also to think a little bit more myself about things, and it's been a positive year in other senses. I spent more time at home, I spent more time with family, I feel more rooted even in my own neighborhood, which is something I should continue to, absolutely. If the normal is back and the insanity of all our lives as musicians is back, I want to continue to be connected like that. And it's this question of community that everybody's talking about, that this is now the time where really orchestras, for example, artistic organizations should focus more on local audiences and art communities. Well, I hope really that's going to happen, because it's a very important thing. But how, I want to ask Christian, how are orchestras, for example, really doing that? And I have to mention a very, very good example I experienced last week, or was going to experience in January. I was, as I said, in Denmark with the wonderful Aarhus Symphony Orchestra, and we did a wonderful program, and we talked about a project. I learned from the general manager, Jesper Nordin, that the Danish government had given a pot of money for arts organizations to put on concerts or events that would benefit lonely people, that maybe elderly people that live alone, that are at this time maybe in danger to becoming depressed and sad, and this is obviously such an important, this is something quite grave that has come out of this pandemic. And it means that orchestras or other arts organizations can apply and do a project like a concert where people who know a lonely person living in their neighborhood or their neighbor can invite these people, and they can come to the concert for free. So they take them to the concert. A neighbor would take a lonely elderly person or somebody else and take to that concert to experience the concert together. And this is, to be honest, this is the first project I've heard of that really, I think, can really contribute to this question of being important to the community, art really making a difference. Art of this sort of level, of this sort of also self-understanding, that it makes a difference to people around us. And I thought, well, this is great. And of course, this should be continued. This shouldn't stop when, let's say, in a year's time, we're all going back to normal and the pandemic has disappeared, which is probably not anyway. But for us, this teaching how we can connect community, this should continue.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, this is such an initiative. I actually hadn't heard of it until you mentioned it a little earlier today. But
we were, and they asked me if I was free to do it in mid-January. I said, yeah, of course because we're all pretty free at the moment, although it's changing. And then, of course, I got the message yesterday that, as I say, even in Denmark now, for the foreseeable future, concerts are. But I'm sure, that money has been committed. And they're going to do it. They're going to do this this project.
Yeah.
And I look forward to hear about it.
There's also something so responsive about it. Like you say, it's it takes us back to what art is and what art is in a community, but it also responds to a particular situation. I think that's also what's so powerful about that. It's kind of taking exactly the situation that we're in, or that certain people are in. That it made me think that that's also an attitude to start adopting as a musician.
Absolutely. And a similar thing happened to me, similar thought, like 3 weeks ago. Went to a hospital in Berlin with my son just to have a routine investigation, the big Rudolf Virchow Krankenhaus, and we sat in the of the kids ward. We sat in the waiting room, and we sat down. It was relatively obviously sterile with the masks and chairs, and opposite where we sat down, there was a beautiful, beautiful sculpture of a mother holding her daughter's hand, trying to walk, and it was very, very arty, very, very beautiful, very moving. And we were really both looking, my 16-year-old son and me, and looking at each other. This is very beautiful. And sort of while we were waiting and a bit nervous, about the whole thing. Looking at this piece of art in that room, it lifted our spirits. And then I had because I sort of Instagrammed a photo of that, and I had an interesting reaction from a friend of mine, the great sculptor and artist Alexander Polzin, who lives here in Berlin. And he said, this is exactly what I'm talking about, like artworks that we all sort of look at in museums, and they're up there on a pedestal. They should clear out all the museums and put all the artworks in public spaces where they actually are beneficial to people in everyday life situations by suddenly being exposed to it, And then I'm now this sort of he's absolutely right. We're talking about music and symphonies and classical orchestras and operas as museums pieces. And it's and it's true. And now, how do we clear out those kind of situations that are museum situations? But again, I will say, it doesn't mean I want to clear out orchestras from the concert halls, because the concert halls are fantastic buildings, and the people who they would love to experience the hall, the room they're in, and they're built for orchestras, and that's where orchestras sound best. So it's not about that. It's just a sort of a virtual thinking, that the idea of it, clearing out the spaces and filling them anew with life. I think that's what needs happening. But I was really thankful for that moment and Alexander's thought, about this.
Yeah, it also, I mean, immediately reminds me of like Dada Manifesto or something, right? Where it's like, I'm for an art that walks itself out of a museum onto the street. It's exactly. And of course, that's our challenge as musicians, because like you say, these great spaces, they are the spaces that lend themselves best to certain works. So perhaps it's also, how do we get, of course, that other age-old question of how we get people in those spaces to feel at home in those spaces.
It is. And it seems so terribly difficult somehow. Everybody talks about marketing. I had these experiences. I had 2 times where I basically bumped into people on the street or a friend of a friend in remote places that are not at home. Once in Glasgow, and it was a concert with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, and once in Auckland with the Auckland Philharmonia. And I kind of literally invited people off the street, because I knew nobody in Auckland, this far away from home. So I had 4 comp tickets, and I literally invited people off the street, and they were never been to a concert, never considered to go to symphonic, first time orchestra concert. And I said, hang around afterwards, I come have a drink with you. Nice. And I did in the concert foyer, and they were absolutely overwhelmed with the experience. Absolutely overwhelmed. And there was a piece, I don't know what the concert was, a Brahms symphony, and the first half was a Schönberg 12-tone piece and a Mozart overture. Guess which piece they loved most?
The Schönberg.
Absolutely easy. It was the sort of sonically most interesting and
of
weird.
Course.
And it's, and the same in Scotland. It was like in an Indian restaurant, got to talk to the neighbors on the table next door and said, what do you do? And I was with the composer, Stephen Mackey. And we got really chatty with them. And again, we did the same thing, and then they'd met the composer and they went to the concert. What, you wrote that music? That's absolutely incredible. So actually, I think just go out on the street, invite people in, and they're like, wow, you really want me? You inviting me? This is so great. Yeah. And then the space is amazing to them, the room, the concert hall, and then the live music's oh my God. And can it be that difficult?
It makes me think that it's that story makes me think about people just need a context sometimes. When I think about also some of the really great film music, some really challenging film music, it's, if you listen to it without a film, I think it would maybe scare people, or you would classify it somehow else. But in the context of, I don't know, in the context of a film, or in a place where they're comfortable, they're just gripped. I don't know why I'm using that as an example, but it's somehow,
no, it's a good example. Sometimes you're right about making connections, and sometimes having it as a vehicle to draw people in. this 2000, you know, I was the lucky conductor during a major 2001 Space Odyssey project that the South Bank and British Film Institute started with the Philharmonia Orchestra, and now it's going around the world. And to play this music live, like all the Ligeti scores and Ligeti Ritz.
That's what I was just thinking about Ligeti. Yeah.
Lux Eterna, and people really love it. And sure, there's all the film fan is always sold out. And, you know, I'd say 90% of the audience is always for the first time live orchestra. And yeah, absolutely lapping it up, absolutely loving it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
It's interesting. And so when you say that about that invitation, it's also just that people, I mean, I come from a non-musical family, and a lot of my family members say it's just about feeling welcome and at home somewhere. Yeah,
for sure. For me, and that's a good, because I came from such a musical family, it took me a while to understand why. I thought everything was music around me, so surely everybody would, you know. And I guess maybe for some of us classical musicians, we're also in this bubble where anyway, you know, and we travel, some of those stars, you know, travel to another orchestra in a different continent every week.
Yeah.
You know, or had 3 orchestras at the same time. And how can you really be part of that? Or can you know who your audience is, for example?
Exactly. Yeah, that's also.
But some can. I mean, some people are brilliant at it. Just, you know, and such open personalities that they're drawing people everywhere. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I guess I couldn't do it myself, even though, you know, you've mentioned it. I do a lot of different things, and it all takes energy. And also this year, it's taking me back to thinking, you know, how do we distribute our energy? And it's not just about the scores and the music making itself, but it's also about the connection and what it means to people out there, you know, why we're doing it, who we're doing it for.
It sort of seems like an opportunity, and doing this series has also like helped me see that, chatting with people every week, that it's an opportunity to kind of reshape what our roles are as musicians. It could be. I mean, maybe that's a bit optimistic, but it is. It could be an opportunity, because it's the first time we can see it somewhat objectively.
Yeah, you're right with the role being, you know, with the footballers, it's always said that they're being the role models. They have to behave well. They can't put a foot wrong because they are role models. And I agree with that. You know, that first they do get paid a lot of money, but also, you know, young kids love them and look up to them. And they are being role models. Whereas in classical music, for example, I've found often that, and it's happened, I've seen it happen, where maybe a musician would dare to have a political opinion, and there was a cultural pages feuilleton in Germany that told that musician to stick to music making, you know, and that just cannot be the case. You know, the act of music making, communicating art to people, is a social and political, by definition, act. And, you know, if you think of the history of pop and rock and electronic music, has always been political, and these people are very vociferous, and there's always been protest music, but also people who don't write protest music as such, you know, they stand for something. Why shouldn't, you know, classical musicians and, you know, our form of art stand for something? And we should also, you know, make a stance. And you know, and we have a voice, and in community we have a very, very powerful voice, not just what we say, but how we play.
Well, something that I think that you said really well in a blog that you wrote recently for Stargaze, and I wanted to ask you about it anyway, is this, you said that how to respond to this political situation, or this, this situation, this climate that we're in. And the phrase that jumped out is that it's a possibility for a new enlightenment for our time.
Yes, that came, you know, this came out of the reading a new book by a German philosopher called Marcus Gabriel, I met him through our friends at the Michelberger Hotel here in Berlin, who are like really great, a great hub of musicians also. And they had Markus Gabriel, who's based in Bonn, as a professor for modern philosophy in Bonn, but he wrote a book recently, which is called Moral Progress in Dark Times. And he mentions the need for a new enlightenment. He sort of deconstructs Kant a little bit, you know, and talks about the enlightenment then and the situation then, but he talks about what our situation right now means geopolitically, environmentally, and everything, and talks about this idea of new enlightenment. And it was funny because in parallel, I was reading this book, this new book on Beethoven,
Right.
by Hans-Heinrich Hinrichsen about Beethoven, that analyzes his fifth and sixth symphony in front of sort of what's going on at the time with Kant and Kant's dissertations, and talking about how enlightenment was manifesting itself and in Beethoven's music. So even though it's sort of seen as absolute music, that it actually does carry a message or a process of thinking that makes you think independently towards free thinking and freedom. And while I was reading these two books at the same time, when I was reading the Beethoven book, because Stargis was doing this Beethoven project, which also was about the question, so why Beethoven still today, and what does it tell us? And then reading about Beethoven's time and how politically and socially he was engaged in conversations with all kinds of contemporaries, not just musicians, you know, being in this dialogue as a composer very much, and not in this ivory tower writing these amazing symphonies, pioneering symphonies just per se. I don't think that was the case. And therefore, that's where I'm kind of thinking for like maybe this situation that we're in also leads, you know, to a new enlightenment in terms of how art is viewed in the political casts, you know, and how important it is, and but also us musicians and the organizations, how we're moving forward.
It's a really wonderful idea. It stuck with me, and it's certainly, if there's a time for it in our time, it would be now. So
absolutely, yeah, and not just, you know, from many points of view. We're not just facing a pandemic, but other worldwide crises.
Exactly.
And that needs to be taken into account.
Yeah. André, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you and having you here and hearing your thoughts.
Likewise, thank you. Thank you for the chat and the
Thank
time.
you. I want to ask you the kind of last question, that hence the title of the show. How and when do you feel music can be revolutionary?
Wow, that's a good question, but I think it links up to the question we were just discussing. I think if music can contribute, musicians can contribute to rethinking and reforming our situation towards a bigger awareness. And, you know, I think music is always connected with empathy, but how it, you know, in these times, how it makes us feel with others, experience with others, and form a community that makes us, that goes beyond music as sort of something that's a luxury or makes us feel a little bit better or helps us to relax. I'm not again. I think to help music, if music helps us to relax, it's a very good thing to do. But I think maybe it can do even more. And if it reaches beyond those borders, then I think it can be because it has a political and social effect. That is a revolution. That is revolutionary to me, for change, helping change.
I love that. Thank you.
Whew, that was that's quite a good one, a difficult one.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again. It was really, really a pleasure to have you here on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And wishing you all the best. Thank you. Happy holidays and all the best for the big projects coming up in February.
Likewise.
or
Thank
January.
you. Hope you'll hear about it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for tuning in, and see you next week.